So first off, we have a new dungeon coming with
Dude,
Fresh. It's called...
we figured they were going to do this, right? Because like normally in season 3, the mega dungeon would have come out already. And then like now it's in the Mythic Plus pool. That's been their system for a while, right? But when they did a dungeon earlier this expansion, which we've been asking for years, you know, like making new in expansion dungeons fresh is sick. And I don't know what the community perception of it is, but I actually loved the Operation Floodgate they did in, is it current season or last season? Like that was really, really fun. The few times I did that seemed really good. They've proven that they're proficient at it. The thing is though, is if you're not going to do a mega dungeon, you at the very least have to make a new dungeon like every season. I think like it's required that you do that. Because like you're already reducing so much work. The mega dungeon is probably significantly more work than just making 2 individual dungeons, right? I think it's obviously bigger in size. Maybe it's not, because technically like what takes a lot of time is the aesthetic and art for this stuff. Like that's the really time sensitive stuff. And like maybe making 2 things separately is harder than one giant thing. I'm not sure, but.
Ecodome Eldani. It's very important to the Ethereals. It's a 3-boss dungeon. We're going to be fighting through Devourers invading one of these places, eating some of the wildlife Steph talked about earlier. That's bad. We're also going to be fighting off a force of Wastelanders that have taken over this place. We're going to fight our way through and figure out why they want this place. One more note with this dungeon is it'll be immediately available on normal, heroic, and baseline mythic with the update on Ghost of Crash.
Wait, so does that mean they're doing Mythic Zeros like immediately, like before the season starts?
Immediately available on normal.
Mythic Zeros week 1. That's nice. I mean, it really felt like in that first week there wasn't enough to do. And I know that that's on purpose. Like they specifically don't want, like think about the scenario where they release the season. So like uncapped Mythic Plus, normal heroic and mythic raid, and like all the campaign chapters and stuff. They don't want people feeling like they can't interact with the story of the game because they have to immediately get on the hamster wheel and start grinding away, you know? Like, so it's very intentional that the week 1 is boring for people who like grind the shit out of the game, right? But it felt, I mean, at least we talked about it on the podcast a lot, where like it felt like it was too little. Like there's just actually like people are excited to play and there isn't anything to do. Just like give them a little carrot on the stick. Beginning of Dragonflight with digging dirt and farming those shitty rares for gear that you would instantly replace kind of showed that like when people really want to just play a game, they're going to want to do that. So like just give them the option to. So I think that's good. If it's still weekly lockout, I mean weekly lockout is still like still so much better.
On Ghost of Crash.
I think the really cool thing about Ecodome Eldani too is that the canonical route that the storyline takes place is the campaign, the raid, and then Ecodome Eldani. And that's not a thing that we do often, you know? So I'm really looking forward to
the canonical route that the storyline takes place.
That the storyline takes place
is the campaign, the raid. So the entire main story involves the raid, the dungeon, and obviously the campaign. Isn't
the campaign, the raid, and then Ecodome Eldani. And that's not a thing that we do often.
Okay, I probably shouldn't have stopped here because I'm totally out of my depth even talking about whatever she's talking about right now at all. But doesn't the story, oh, it ends with the dungeon instead of the raid? Oh, I see. So she said canonically, but I didn't get it was like in that order. Okay, the dungeon's the last part of the story.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how people
Isn't that weird that the dungeon's going to come out before the raid though?
To this cadence.
So what are the dungeons in the dungeon pool?
Oh yeah, let's dive into that as well. Let's talk about the returning ones first.
Okay.
So we're going to head back to
Halls of Atonement, banger. Interesting to see what kind of changes they would make to this. Okay, random thought, but I think if Halls of Atonement would have came back 2 seasons ago, like beginning of this expansion, I think people would have hated it because they would have buffed it and made all these, basically at the beginning of this expansion, they were like so anti-mass pulling. They just made mobs do everything. Obviously we've talked about this a bunch. And if they brought Halls of Atonement back, they would have like absolutely ruined it. But now since last season, especially last season, like all the rhetoric from them was like, we get it. We hear you. Like, I know you guys have been saying it for a long time, but we get it. And then they made the dungeon pool, from what I can tell, a lot more forgiving in that way. So I think we're getting Halls of Atonement, which is good, but we're also getting it at the right time.
Revendreth and visit our friends, the Venthyr and the Halls of Atonement. So the next 2, like Steph mentioned, Tazavesh is...
I've never been a huge fan of Streets, but Dratnos is a big fan of Streets, and I think Dratnos is really smart. Gambit is one of the best all-time Mythic Plus dungeons. It's like top... It's literally #1 for me, but it is... like almost anyone you talk about, it's top 3.
coming back. So we
So that's goated.
said Tazavesh should come back.
Of course.
So 3 of 8 right now
Dungeon when it was
own.
first introduced. So
And we're getting the new dungeon, right? So 4 of them are new dungeon, which I'm just going to let's just say it's as good as Floodgate, which I think was great. We have 4 really
break
good
it in two
dungeons
pieces,
so
of
far.
course.
That's a big stretch, isn't it?
We're going to have Tazavesh Streets of
Because
Wonder.
this
We're
one
actually
dungeon they
fighting
made
through the
was good,
markets
that
and
means
bazaars
this
and
one
streets
will be
of
good.
Tazavesh, chasing down Salia. And then we'll have the second half, which is Salia's Gambit, where we're chasing him through portals and eventually having our final showdown. Tazavesh will also be returning as a mega dungeon experience in Ghosts of Koresh.
Oh, just like reusing
Starting
them.
with
Well, that's
season
fine.
3.
Okay, so that's how they're replacing the mega dungeon this expansion.
You'll be able to play it in hard mode as the baseline mythic difficulty. It'll have increased challenges, hard mode mechanics, and really awesome rewards. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh,
I also think having a mega dungeon experience at the beginning of a patch is way cooler than a middle of the patch experience.
we also have.
Because like it doesn't scale fast enough. Like you do it as hard mode week 1 and it's like kind of cool, and then it just becomes this thing you're farming that isn't that fun for a while, and then you have to wait months, and then it's a Mythic Plus dungeon, and now it's going to be hard mode mega dungeon into Mythic Plus
And a
right away.
community
And I think that cadence is way
vote for the
way
last
better.
4. What were the winners?
Yeah, it was really cool to see what players' favorite dungeons were in the War Within, and the 4 that players chose were Operation Floodgate from Season 2.
Okay, wait. So he said, okay, so that poll of what players' favorite dungeons was actually
were in the War
relevant.
Within, and the 4 that players chose were Operation Floodgate from Season 2, going back to punch some goblins, Priory of the Sacred Flame, just awesome Hollowfall vibes throughout, and then we're going to round that out.
I don't know if people actually liked. Okay, it's hard to tell because like I haven't been paying attention for a while, but I know Priory was really overtuned initially, and a lot of people do dungeons and then quit the season, and they just never have their opinion change after that. Oh, that's so interesting. You're saying that all the things that they've chosen were just dungeons with great trinkets in it.
Hollow
I mean, I don't think that's too off base. Like, think about it. What are one of Mythic Plus's biggest gripes, right? It is I have to raid, and specifically after last patch, I have to raid deep into the raid on Mythic to get the best gear to do the content I like doing. If you're like a pure Mythic Pluser. So if you're a Mythic Plus, Andy, you voting in your own best interest, yeah, you want a good dungeon, but don't you also like really want to make sure you don't have to raid to get the best shit? Or if you don't want to raid, you get as close as possible to the best shit. So voting for trinket dungeons actually makes sense. I mean, people vote for that for all kinds of reasons. Like, remember Mauve Souls? Like, everyone, if you had like a Legion dungeon, like, which one would you vote to come back? Mauve Souls would be like #1 or way up there on the list. And that's purely based on people farming it on like the extreme lowest difficulty for artifact power. And it wasn't about the actual dungeon at all, right? People are going to vote based on their experience with the dungeon. If the experience was like, you did it a lot to where you actually got to understand it because you were farming it for a trinket, you'll usually like those things more.
fall vibes through.
I don't think it's weird. Is it surprising at least that it turned out that way? But okay, what were the other dungeons they picked? Because let's try to discern if any of them were actually bad.
With 2 dungeons from Season 1 of The War Within, Arakara, City of Echoes, and the Dawnbreaker. Just quick.
I did not do a ton of Mythic Plus, but I enjoyed Arakara, Dawnbreaker, and Priory. Also aesthetically, I think at least Dawnbreaker and Priory go crazy. And I would love to see, we'll never know the answer to this, but these polls that they looked at, I wonder the amount of people who voted on this. I wonder if I could see like a pie chart of what percentage of voters were like people who did these dungeons a couple of times and voted purely off vibes, like aesthetic and vibes, versus how many people were like, you know, did a little bit of Mythic Plus versus people that like were just absolute turbo degenerate Mythic Plusers, right? Which, I mean, there's also just a generally few amount of those players in total, but like I wonder if they overrepresented the voting, right? I don't think that data exists. Oh yeah, the data will never exist. I'm just I would be interested in knowing what that is. Like but because I don't know that information, it kind of makes any result of voting make sense to me, because all of those people could like dungeons for totally different reasons, you know? Like someone who doesn't really care about doing high keys or really dungeons at all can like go into the Dawnbreaker one time and be like, yo, this was sick. Or go into Priory and be like, I am transported by being here into a different place and I love the way this looks and feels. And maybe people who think like that, which are always underrepresented when we're talking about things, like vastly overrepresent the polling, you know? Who knows? I don't know. So because of that, it's kind of hard to say how voting goes exactly. Plus, even within the dungeon community, it's kind of hard. outside of a few universal bangers, it's kind of hard for people to agree on even what the best dungeons are. Like, people are just like, dude, don't vote for trinkets, vote for what the best dungeons are. But like, I think that's super subjective, even within like high key players. Honestly, like you hear takes like that all the time.
Note for the season 1 dungeons, we are going to take a pass, on the visuals, the combat pacing, the cast times, the number of abilities, even to make sure they're aligned with season 2 dungeons.
Are there any
That's a really important thing. Also, that's important for Halls of Atonement and the Tazavesh dungeons coming back. That, yeah, I mean, it would make sense that the dungeons being brought back are going to be aligned with their new philosophy. You could have just said our philosophy on dungeons isn't changing, which would also be
other
fine.